So what separates the best companies from the rest is, in very short, I would say, their IP operating models. The operating model is defining how a company is organizing and managing its IP resources to achieve its IP strategic ambitions. Most IP professionals would agree that business-driven IP is about having two critical capabilities. On the one hand side, it's about creating the right IP portfolio, and then on the other hand side, it's about, most importantly, to implement business-driven use of that portfolio. Despite this, the absolute majority of the world's IP companies are tasked only with the first, which is to create the right IP. How they're then going to use that IP portfolio is very often overlooked. The IP function is traditionally organized as a support function with a cost center status. It has an isolated peripheral position, and it typically has low executive management attention. But for anyone who wants to create business-driven IP, the most important learning from the world's leading IP companies is that business-driven IP requires engagement not only within the IP function, but across the entire company. The way that these companies are doing this practically is that they are building balanced partnerships between, on the one hand side, a team-based IP function, and then on the other hand side, business decision makers and functional experts outside in the company. We call this at Concert the strategic business partner model. All companies are using different frameworks to subdivide their business into smaller components. If we, for instance, look at marketing, they are using maybe different product categories tied to customer segments or geographical markets. If we look within purchasing, they most likely will have procurement areas or supplier categories or the like. The same goes for R&D or for other parts of the company. The IP function then typically has its own framework for clustering their portfolio. However, this is very seldom synced with different adjacent corporate functions and the frameworks that are being used there. And this is a problem because if the IP portfolio framework is not synced with the other frameworks around it, it has major implications for the manageability of the IP portfolio and, in turn, the company's ability to achieve its IP business objectives. If we then again look at what leading IP companies are doing, they have an IP framework that is compatible with the principal framework or typically frameworks used in that company. In this way, they have created a common language, and they also have created compatibility between the IP framework and the other frameworks, which means that they have created a future-proof structure and something that holds over time. Traditional IP functions can provide absolutely excellent advice in relation to legal and regulatory questions. But since they are acting reactively and typically on an individual basis, they normally fail to deliver the business value that they should for their companies. If we instead look at what leading IP companies are doing, they are focusing on business accountability. And what they do is that they focus this business accountability to a minimum number of accountable IP directors. They then designate appropriate counterparts out in the business for these IP directors. They create a balanced authority between the business and IP. They build cross-disciplinary teams that work under leadership of these IP directors. And all in all, this helps them to deliver on their responsibilities to create business value for their companies. What they also do, and maybe most importantly, is that they mirror these IP functions to the business. And by aligning the IP function with the internal value chain of the company, instead of having it organized according to IP types or IP processes, these IP functions have a proactive and strategic role in the company, which is allowing them to create high value for their companies instead of just focusing on the case at the top of the pile. The assumptions in these companies is that R&D is supposed to conduct projects in line with the needs of the business. And if they do that, it also should then mean that inventions coming from these projects are relevant to the business. Hence, if you then patent inventions from these projects, these patents are supposed to be business relevant. In reality, however, if we look at it, it typically means that you get a very scattered portfolio. And very often it also means that more than 50% of that portfolio is lacking business value potential. It also means that if you're organized in this way, you typically fail to provide the crucial input that IP can provide to the other parts of the company. And it also has an adverse effect on IP creation speed, which means a disadvantage in relation to your competitors. To address these issues, best-in-class companies have included IP in their strategic dialogues. They're also proactively involving the IP function in the business planning process, and it also then means that they are allowing IP to provide IP-based foresight to all stakeholders in the company. As I think anyone knows, decisions determine performance, which means that if you're able to make better and faster decisions and are able to execute those decisions more effectively than your competitors, you will be outperforming them. Within IP, this is, however, quite challenging because it is difficult to create alignment for an IP capability that is spread out over different regions, different functions, and different business units. Another issue is what you base your decisions on. Decisions are only good if they lead towards value creation. But if we look at IP functions and their legacy as a support function, and then typically as cost centers with a bias towards IP creation, it means that they quite often may be doing decisions on the wrong things. If we then again go to what the leading IP companies are doing, they have been very clear on what the key decisions are, who must be involved in those decisions, and how they should be executed. What they have also done is that they have implemented metrics and key performance indicators, not only within the IP function, but also, crucially, outside of it, and on both sides of business-driven IP, that is both for IP creation, but also for the IP use part. If you are redesigning your IP operating model according to these 4 pillars, you will have transformed your IP function from a reactive support function to a proactive strategic business partner. It will also mean that you have moved your IP function much closer to the core business and to key business decision making. If we look at companies that have taken this all the way, they have built IP operations that are today making significant contributions to their bottom lines.